Hello,
Hi.
and with us today is Clyde Cleveland, and welcome, Clyde. Thank you so much for this interview.
I'm very happy to be here.
Very
Excited.
good. Well, Clyde, I met you over the last few months of the World Health Organization's announcement of the pandemic in 2020, January 30th,
Right.
and have had the wonderful opportunity of sharing information with you and learning a great deal about the work that you do and history. And I was wondering if you could maybe just give a brief explanation of who you are.
Yeah, I'm been around for a while. I'm 70. I'm still married. We just had our 50th wedding anniversary. My wife and I. We have 4 kids, 7 grandkids. We're very close. I'm actually helping raise 2 of my grandkids in our house here in Florida. And then 2 of the other 7 grandkids live across the street from us. So I see 4 of my 7 grandkids every day, and we do stuff with them all the time. We ride bikes together. We're in the pool together. We work out together. We do everything together. And I just had the other 3 from California here for Father's Day and our 50th anniversary, which was a couple weeks ago. So we had all 7 of the grandkids here. And we went on long bike rides. Everybody's an athlete in this family. You can't be in this family unless you're an athlete. That's one of the rules.
I like that.
So we stay in good shape, and we love to do stuff together. One of my sons was a professional tennis player. They all played tennis in college. Anyway, so that's a little bit about the family stuff. My wife and I met at Indiana State University in Terre Haute, Indiana. It was during the Vietnam War, which kind of politicized me. I was Rush chairman and vice president of my fraternity. I loved being in the fraternity and organizing parties, and I was very social. I wasn't a very good student because I was too busy being Rush chairman and vice president of my fraternity. And then I met my wife, and she was starting to become a hippie, and I was actually moving in that direction too, as the Vietnam War was really bothering me, and I was doing a lot of research on it. I actually wrote a research paper on Vietnam before I really made my transition, which really kind of had a big impact on me, where I found that before we declared war on Vietnam, all of the U.S. News, Newsweek, all the different Time, all the different magazines at that time, which were the mainstream media of that time, were those magazines. I was researching what they were saying about Vietnam. And what struck me was that before we decided to go to war and actually officially declared war, all of those newspapers were actually telling the truth about what was going on and what we were doing there. They were telling, like, we assassinated the CIA. That was in these newspapers. But once there was like a date, one day when then the next month, all of the issues had a completely different story. It was all propaganda, and I could see it. I could see the day it changed. And I had no idea that that could happen. But what it showed me is that our government was totally in control of these major media of that time. So that was in 1968 that I had that realization. And that was kind of a turning point for me. And I became political. I started marching in anti-war marches, and I started studying. I switched my major from business to political science. And I also, at the same time, became interested in spirituality and religion. So I was taking we had a great religion professor at Indiana State. My wife and I took every course this guy taught. And I also started to experiment a little bit with mind-expanding drugs, which really sent me off. And for me, it was all a spiritual thing. It wasn't, other people, it was like fun and partying and stuff. For me, it was more of a spiritual exploration. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that the drugs were not the way to become spiritual. but that set me off towards looking for a form of meditation or spiritual path, which I eventually, not too long, it took me a few months, I started transcendental meditation. And my wife and I did it together. It was actually our last month of college in May of 1971. By 1972, we were in Spain becoming teachers of transcendental meditation on a 10-week teacher training course with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And I'll just tell you, I could go, a lot about the TM or my TM history, but what struck me when I went to the TM lecture was one thing that the teacher said that made so much sense to me. And what he said was, because part of his lecture was about how TM could help bring about world peace, which was my big thing at that point. And he said, for a forest to be green, each individual tree needs to be green. And it just struck me like a thunderbolt. And I said, yeah. And so anyway, we started TM. We really loved it. We got totally into the TM movement. And my goal at that point was to try to teach every person on the planet transcendental meditation and create world peace and, love and freedom and, all the things that I believed in at that point. So anyway, that's kind of what I did. And we did that for years. Finally, we couldn't afford to raise a family and teach TM at the same time. It just wasn't working out financially. So we got into real estate. We created it was with a bunch of other meditators. And we created Age of Enlightenment Real Estate Company in San Diego, California. We were really out there with our spiritual orientation. So anyway, that company flourished. We did very, very well. That's when I was in New Mexico, by the way, because we ended up buying some very large apartment complexes in Albuquerque. And so I was out there a lot. And, as a broker, we had properties all over the Southwest. So that kind of launched my business career. But we ended up moving from California to Fairfield, Iowa, because that's where the TM movement was based, because the TM movement bought Parsons College in 1974. And a lot of our friends from around the country who we met through the TM movement were moving there so their kids could go to school there. So our kids, all 4 of our kids went to Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment. That was a school they grew up in. And we lived in Fairfield for over 30 years and involved with the TM movement. But I also had my interest in politics still. And I ended up writing some books, and then I ran for office a couple of times. The second time was for governor of Iowa as a Libertarian. And the Libertarian philosophy of nonviolence and non-coercion kind of fit with my spiritual philosophy more than any other political party. And that was the party that really attracted me. Because basically at that point, to become a Libertarian, a member of the Libertarian Party, you had to sign a statement saying that you would not use coercion, that you believe in non-coercion and you would not use coercion in your dealings with other human beings. And I really like that.
Is that still part of their
I don't know. I kind of lost track with the Libertarian Party. I actually, after my run for governor was over, which was pretty successful, we got close to 2% of the vote, which in a state like Iowa, which has no history at all for independents or third parties doing well, people thought that was pretty amazing. One thing that we did do is me and the Green Party candidate were working together to try to increase access, ballot access, because it was ridiculously hard for a third party candidate to get on the ballot in Iowa and lots of other states. And of course, the two parties, that's one thing the two parties agree on, is keeping anybody else out of their game. And so we sued, me and the Green Party, I signed for the Libertarian Party, he signed for the gubernatorial candidate for the Green Party, signed for the Green Party, the Libertarian Party, and the Civil Liberties Union. We all 3 sued the state of Iowa over the ballot access issue. And we won our suit. It took 2 years. We won our suit. And to this day, third-party candidates can be on the ballot without having to do all this extensive signature gathering and all this other stuff. So anyway,
doing that.
So that was cool. That was one thing that we did accomplish from the campaign. But I wrote a book during that time called Restoring the Heart of America, A Return to Government by the People. And then later on, Common Sense Revisited, also in 2007. And both books really talk about the difference between what I call indigenous power and surrogate power. And I feel like we were created to be able to have this indigenous power. That's what we were created with, of free will. Really, it's human beings are designed to be able to be free will, and then we need to use our free will in order to develop our full potential. If we can't use our free will, we can't develop our full potential. They go hand in hand. They're part and parcel of one another. Developing full potential and freedom have to go together. So that's kind of really, and again, that fits with my whole spiritual view as well. So it is a spiritual view, and the founders understood this, and they saw it as a spiritual thing too, that we needed to have liberty and freedom to be able to develop and be fully realized human beings.
But
so
then
anyway,
what happened if the founders saw that? I mean, what percentage of the founders saw that? Maybe you could.
Oh, well, the founders, the ones that really believed that really understood that would be Sam Adams, George Mason, who wrote the Virginia Declaration of Rights, which really was adopted by almost every one of the colonies and was really the formative, concepts that Jefferson used in writing the Declaration of Independence. So George Mason was a major guy. Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, Richard Henry Lee, George Wythe, Thomas Jefferson, all of them were the founders who really understood that principle and really understood that the power had to be decentralized and localized, that the power, the number one was the individual. And then it would be the local government and the locals' ability to rule themselves. And then the state would be sort of an enabler, but not telling the local communities what they had to do or individuals what they had to do. And then the federal government should be very just like which it was under the Articles of Confederation, just like an association of states, which is like non-coercive, but a defense pact, so that, if somebody outside power wanted to come in and invade the United States, we would have this defense pact and we would have a military to protect us against that attack, but not to have power over us, not to have power over the states, not to have the power over individuals. That was the original concept. And that's what they fought the Revolutionary War to create. And that's what the Articles of Confederation did. And the Articles of Confederation were, people don't realize this, but they were effective enough that we defeated the largest military force on the earth, and that the earth had ever seen at that time. So the Articles of Confederation were effective enough for us to do that. But it wasn't powerful enough for the centralizers. And then that brings in Alexander Hamilton and his cronies and the John Jay and the other. And we talked a little bit about this before, names. Federalism means distributed power. That means distributing the power to the furthest limits of the organizational structure. Alexander Hamilton named them the Federalists, which was a misuse of that name. And then the other guys, Patrick Henry, Sam Adams, George Mason, they had no choice but to call themselves anti-federalists. So right there, that's where the whole concept of falsely naming who you really are started with that at that time.
Wow. So, and how did they co-opt the name?
They just called themselves the Federalists, and they wrote the Federalist Papers. You know, John Jay, and also not who came after Jefferson was the president after Jefferson. I'm blanking out a little bit on that one right now. It'll come.
My American history isn't good enough.
Okay, so anyway, Hamilton was the main organizer of the centralizers, and he had George Washington. He knew how to manipulate George Washington because he was his major aide during the entire war. By the time the war was over, Washington was beat. He was beat down. He was tired. He didn't have much energy. And Alexander Hamilton, he made Alexander Hamilton the Secretary of State. He made Jefferson, Secretary of the Treasury. He made Jefferson Secretary of State. And then basically he let Hamilton choose all the other people that were on the cabinet and most of the other officials at that time. So Hamilton was the power behind Washington. But let's back up again. That happened after the Continental Congress of 78 and 79. Before that, Hamilton was constantly working towards that convention and, you know, doing anything he could to discredit the Articles of Confederation. And if something would happen that would be a problem, he'd blame the Articles of Confederation, and he was working behind the scenes to try to sabotage the Articles of Confederation, so that when they would eventually have a convention, he would be able to move that convention to actually creating a new form of government, which is what he did. He was very intelligent, extremely intelligent, and to me, evil, because I don't like centralizers. I don't like centralized power. And he did it. And he wanted America to be the next England. He wanted America to replace England as a superpower. That was his goal.
Was there a shift back and forth of decentralized governments?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was we were operating under the Articles of Confederation since 1778. Fighting the war under the Articles of Confederation, and then after the war was over, from 82 until 1787, 78, when that convention happened, we were operating under the Articles of Confederation. We had, I think it was 11 presidents under the Articles of Confederation. Richard Henry Lee was one of them. So the anti-federalists, when they knew that there were some problems, and there were problems, there were financial problems. It was very difficult to get all the states to do the funding that they agreed to, and all these, there were different problems. But virtually everyone in terms of the people wanted the Articles of Confederation and thought that's what they were going to do when they met at that convention, was amend the Articles of Confederation. But that's not what Hamilton had in mind. Right. And what they did was they had a plan. James Madison, that was the one I was trying to think of. At that point in time, Jefferson, who was sort of like a mentor to James Madison, was in France. Things would have been completely different if Jefferson had been at the Constitutional Convention. Completely different. But he wasn't. He missed out on that whole thing. So he left it, the Anti-Federalists kind of left it to George Mason. Patrick Henry wouldn't even go. He wouldn't even go. His comment was, "I smell a rat, I'm not going." So he kind of left it to Richard Henry Lee and a few others to try to counter Hamilton's influence of that convention. But when all was said and done, and I think George Mason was the most brilliant man there and definitely the strongest freedom advocate for individual liberty. When they asked him to sign it, he said, his famous comment was, "I'd sooner cut off my right hand than sign that document." So he did everything he could to make it as good as possible, but he wouldn't sign it. And that started, from that day on, there was a battle in the country between the Anti-Federalists, and the Anti-Federalists wrote their papers, the Anti-Federalist papers, and the Federalist papers. And as you probably know, most people have never even heard of the Anti-Federalist Papers.
I haven't.
Because that old saying, the history goes to the victor, and the Federalists won that battle. So you don't hear much about the Anti-Federalists. My heart and soul is with the Anti-Federalists. I would have been an Anti-Federalist. Most of the people were Anti-Federalists, but Hamilton was a brilliant manipulator, brilliant politician, and he had Washington on his side.
We need to speed up in terms of we're in the 1700s still. And
yeah, so 1780s. Okay, you want me to move forward?
Well, I would, because we're talking about.
I just love this period so much. Anyway,
yes, I know.
The parties that we have today are really kind of, we have decentralizers, and we have sort of the freedom-oriented Republicans and the Libertarians who are for decentralization. We have the Democratic, especially the left wing of the Democratic Party, and establishment Republicans who want more power. They want more power in the government. They like power in centralized government, and power is very addictive. So what we're witnessing today is not much different in terms of the battle and what the people wanted then as what the people want now. A lot of people want a very decentralized government, limited in power, and they want freedom, and they want liberty, and they want to exercise their indigenous power. It's the same battle. It's always being fought. And people in government and people who are powerful, and they have, maybe not even necessarily in government, but they're corporations that have control over government because they have strong lobbyists in Washington, D.C. You have these institutional powers. You have religions, you have corporations, you have governments working together to continue to increase the centralization of power. And you have people that are working to decentralize that power so that they don't get run over by these institutions.
Clyde, let's add in a few more words into this, because we have, language has been co-opted throughout time,
right.
and words that are used to describe various groups are used to polarize groups.
Right.
The Hegel dialectic,
right.
is about
Hegelian dialectic.
Yes,
right.
it's about pitting different people, different parties, different groups. It's about creating groups. It's about taking something that's whole and splintering it, or at least creating halves, and then taking those halves and continuing to have, and then to create conflict between those opposing groups, and then for those who are in power to then basically manage the conflict between the two as they amass more power and more money. And so here we have, as you described, these various segments of political alignment, from conservative Republicans to left-wing liberals and Democrats and libertarians. And so we've got all these names. And yet underneath all that, really, it is about centralized or decentralized.
Yes.
And so there's also the word socialism versus capitalism. And I have heard, like, historian Anthony Sutton talk about the fact that they mean one and the same thing. So here we have all these terms that we've been taught, and we've been given very elaborate definitions of what each one means. But they're all being thrown into the center now: nihilism and Marxism and socialism and capitalism and neo conservatism. I mean, there's so many terms. But if we really want to look at what's going on today, we're looking at centralization and decentralization, which is really what was happening in the 1700s.
Yep, you just described it beautifully. It's really this, that with all these different groups, it really comes down to centralizers and decentralizers. And it's the same thing now as it was back in the 1700s and before. And Sun Tzu, you know, he was, you know, you can go all the way back to before BC and Sun Tzu, and it was still, he taught, you know, divide and conquer. I mean, that's one of the fundamental principles of war, is you try to divide your enemy. And so that's what they did, divide and conquer. And, you know, it's really, and they're really good at it. And the media is so controlled by these institutions that it's really difficult. If we didn't have the internet right now, it'd be over for people who believe in freedom. The internet is saving us right now.
Well, I think that's also a double-edged sword, because the internet is bringing to us microwave radiation frequencies, and many people are wireless, and many people are using cell phones, all of which support the proliferation of cell towers and 5G satellites and the rollout of 5G, right, which right, ultimately is the whole transhumanist movement toward roboticizing people.
Right.
And so it's interesting. Was the internet brought to us for us, or was the internet brought to us to enslave us? I really am from the posture that the internet, well, at first it appeared to be freedom, and still is freedom within a locked super stadium freedom, or is freedom outside that stadium? Because the internet to me is very much like a locked super stadium. Right. And that we are becoming less and less free with every, you know, with more and more rollout. So right, do you have some thoughts on that?
We have to make sure that the decentralizers have effective control of the internet. I mean, that's the bottom line, because, you know, if we let the Googles and YouTubes of the world continue with what they're doing, trying to censor us, anybody that they don't agree with, you know, we're gonna lose the opportunity to have the knowledge that's going around right now. If it wasn't for these channels that are not controlled by YouTube and Google, that are, I mean, you know, I don't know how many things I've sent out to people, and then within a couple of days, YouTube has censored them, but they're showing on BitChute and other channels. Yeah. So we have to make sure that we can continue to use the internet to advance the cause of liberty and freedom and indigenous power. You know, otherwise it's going to be very difficult. But here's the other thing, though, that we do have going for us, and this is a little different subject, but I think we need to get into it. The problem with that the centralizers have is they're always creating hierarchical organizations. And hierarchical organizations are always coercive, and they always, it's a law of nature, they always end up creating bureaucracies. And bureaucracies, my definition for bureaucracy, and I get this from some other people that I've worked with, is, so it's not mine, is that the systematic destruction of creativity. So yes, that's what happens with bureaucracies. You get these cumbersome, incredibly wasteful, stupid things that they do. And, you know, they always end up shooting themselves in the foot, because they aren't creative. They aren't intelligent. They do stupid things. I mean, look at the things that have happened in the last few years with this whole Russiagate thing. It was totally mishandled. They completely blew it. It was easy to start tearing apart, and it's going to be torn apart, and it's going to come down that it was a completely bogus operation, completely criminal operation. You know, so, you know, the centralizers are they're going to try to amass power, but they're always going to make mistakes. They're always going to do really, really stupid, uncreative things. So, you know, I think that this battle, I don't know, maybe it just goes on and on and on forever. You know, I don't know, unless we evolve. But I think that's what it really is. I think it's got to be a spiritual evolution, because I think as people evolve spiritually, they understand what indigenous power is. They understand the importance of having structures that are non-coercive and non-bureaucratic and non-hierarchical. To me, it's obvious, but, you know, and that's what I try to teach. I try to teach that, you know, we need to evolve. We need to have, you know, if we want to get people, like I know a lot of Democrats and they're anti-war, right? That makes no sense. Do things using force. The only way that we can ever create world peace. Oh, our connection is unstable. Did you see that?
I did.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Okay, good. You know, how can you ever get to world peace when you have all these coercive structures? They're coercive by nature, so they're going to create war. That's why the UN has done absolutely nothing to stop wars, and they never will. The UN is really a socialist organ. What they're pushing, their agenda is socialist.
Well, it's one world order.
One world order.
There's nothing that has been hidden from us.
No.
United Nations means United Nations. One.
Yeah.
So all we have to do is to stop and actually look at what we're being told. And we're actually being told exactly what the powers that be are intending for the majority.
Oh yeah, and they put their agenda in movies and all kinds of things.
Yes.
So, you know, their agenda is not secret. It's just for us, the people, just human beings have to wake up and realize what's happening to them. And we need to organize, and we need to create, I think the key is creating what D. Hock in The Birth of the Chaotic Age called non-coercive enabling organizations, NEOs, non-coercive enabling organization. And that's what he talks about in his book, Birth of the Chaotic Age. It's phenomenal. The man is a genius. If I could put him, he's in his 90s now. He is still alive and he's retired, but he would be a great person to create a model or a new model of a international organization that would be the opposite of the UN. It would be non-coercive. It would be a non-coercive enabling organization. And it would replace, I would like to create that, help create that with others, and have somebody like D. Hock be in charge of it. And its role would be to replace the UN and help nations become sovereign nations and help their citizens become sovereign individuals. So I'd call it Sovereign Nations Sovereign Nation Association, SNA. And that organization or something like it should replace the UN. The UN is a big player in all the centralization efforts in the world. You know, in education, they have a big influence on education in this country. A lot of these things that are coming down that are meant to completely affect our the way we interact with each other, you know, the way we think, everything, you know, the political correctness, all that stuff's coming from the UN.
Yes.
And so, you know, if we don't do something to have the UN go away, and as Bucky Fuller said, you know, Buckminster Fuller, one of my favorite quotes from him is, you can't fight the existing model, because with the existing model has been institutionalized. You're going to be fighting every group, every organization in the world to try to change that. What you have to do is you have to create a new model that people will be attracted to. And as they come to that new model, the old model fades away.
Well, and we also know that, you know, we have given our power. We've been taught. We have been programmed to disempower ourselves.
Right.
We have been taught to give authority the power. So the power is outside of ourselves.
Right.
It's like what you said with the transcendental meditation. The way to a green forest is for each tree,
Each individual to be green. Yeah.
which is what we have to do. That our whole spiritual
Right.
responsibility is we have to empower ourselves.
Right.
Because if we empower ourselves, we hold that magnificence. We hold that the answers, and we hold the decentralized power within each one of us.
That's right.
And that's where it actually has to happen, because at that point, no one else's ideology can replace our own empowerment.
Yes. And let me hold that thought for a minute, because the great example of that is healthcare. We have been brainwashed to think that doctors and pharmaceutical companies are the answer to our health. Think of how incredibly make us healthy are the decisions that we make.
Yes.
What we put in our food, every single bite of food that we take, everything that we drink, that we're determining our health, whether or not we exercise.
And every
our
thought,
thoughts,
and
our
every
thoughts.
emotion.
That's why you meditate, other things, so you're not stressed. You're not you're at ease, not at ease. That's what dis-ease is. So all of it comes down to the individual. This whole thing about healthcare and the healthcare system and all of this, it's all Maya, is that Indian word, which is like an illusion. It's all BS. That health, whether or not we have Obamacare or Trump care or any other kind of care, as long as we don't realize that we are the only ones that can make ourselves healthy, we're just going to continue with this game. And we're going to give that medical pharmaceutical industrial complex, which is what it is, just like the military industrial complex, we're going to just give them power. Stop using their products. Just make yourself healthy. Read the China study, read the tons of books that are out there, and make yourself healthy. Start eating right, start exercising. This body, your body is designed to live for 120 years minimum. I think longer. And we don't live that long because we don't do the things that we need to do for our health. Now, there are things that we can't control in the environment, GMOs and other things that we now have in our foods. But
we can choose. We can choose what we put into our body.
That's right.
And we can choose the vibrational level that
yes.
we want to operate within.
Right.
And so through that meditation, we can reach that.
Right.
So we have so much within our power, but
right.
we live in a world that continually works to disempower us. Socialism, Sutton said, historian Anthony Sutton said, banks on covering up all truth.
Right.
And so there are three different levels of truth. The first basic truth is one that the system gives us. That when you get to the third level of truth, that truth is usually hidden for 50 to 100 years through their own antics. But that's the level of truth that we're all working to reach. And that's the truth we reach within ourselves. And no one can take that from us. So when we do reach that level of empowerment, we have freedom, regardless the system that is operating before us.
Right.
So how is it, though? I want to go back to this idea of socialism. During Woody Guthrie and Pete Seeger and, during the Dust Bowl times, people looked out for one another. I mean, the idea of socialism and helping one another has been given a very bad name. But there is such a thing as socialism on the local level that is the next thing to godliness, in my opinion.
Yeah. It's true.
So how do we actually differentiate there? And at what point did the whole aspect of socialism just become so cutthroat and destructive?
Well, it really goes back to, and I actually joined the Socialist Party when I was 20 years old. And a lot of that was because of the military-industrial complex. And, you know, that was Eisenhower's speech, was, you know, he was the one who named it. By the way, just so people know this, when Eisenhower wrote that speech, it was written, he wrote it, military, industrial, congressional complex.
Oh.
Okay? And he was begged by his advisors to take out the word Congress, congressional. So when he said this, when he actually spoke, he said military industrial complex. But he knew it was a military industrial congressional complex. So this goes back to how surrogate power with companies and governments and religions and other organizations all coalesce to protect their own power and grow their power. But he totally understood this concept. So now in this country, today we have the military industrial congressional complex. We have the medical pharmaceutical congressional industrial complex. We have the criminal justice incarceration in congressional industrial complex. All of these corporations are controlling our Congress, and they control it through lobbyists. They control it through junkets. They control it by offering all these congressmen, when they come in, a really, really big salary job when they leave. It's all this way. I just heard a speech by Nancy Pelosi saying exactly this thing. She actually used the word swamp. It's from 30 years ago. She sounded just like Donald Trump. Exactly, almost the exact words. They all know it. They all know that this is totally corrupt, which is always what happens when power centralizes. It always becomes corrupt. So anyway, it's all about, I want to mention in this vein, a book called Creative Transformation by John David Garcia. The guy was brilliant. He's a philosopher, very, very brilliant. Also kind of hard to understand because his mind is just going in all these different directions. But somebody got him to write one thing, which was a foreword to his book, Creative Transformation. He's written many books. But if you read that foreword, he really has some brilliant concepts in there that I think I just want to mention in this interview. What he did, religion is one of the things that's used to divide us, obviously. I mean, look at all the wars that are really caused because of what religion you're in. So religion is one of the ways that they use the Hegelian dialectic to divide us. But what's important is that we have a common ethic. So what he came up with, and he really studied ethics. That's one of the major fields that he thought was the most important field of all, is ethics. And he came up with the following ethic: that when you engage in an action, that you engage in every action you engage in it with the intent to increase the creativity of at least one other person, including yourself, without coercing or doing harm to anyone. That's your intention. And that Jesus would be happy with that. Buddha would be happy with that. Muhammad would be happy with that. Everybody. The Taoism would be happy with that. So what he did, I think, is genius, because he came up with an ethical value that wouldn't be counter to any religion, that everyone could accept. And there wouldn't be any harm done to anyone, because nobody would coerce anyone else. And creativity has several different logical equivalents. And here's the logical equivalence. If you're increasing creativity, you can't help but increase love. If you're increasing creativity and love, you can't help but increase truth. And if you increase those three, another one would be personal evolution. A fifth one would be awareness. Those 5 are really logical equivalents. If you're increasing one, you're increasing the other 3 or 4. So that, I think, is a key for us to really unite. If we can get people to agree to that ethical commitment, wherever they are, whatever they call themselves, whether they call themselves a socialist or a libertarian or a conservative or whatever, or a, what's the one where an anarchist, whatever. But if you can agree to that, I think even an anarchist would agree to that ethic. So then the next thing he did was this whole concept of a non-coercive enabling organization. He and another associate of mine, Robert Podolsky, did research for years on the type of group, the size of group that would create the most, express the most creativity. And they experimented with different sizes of groups, anywhere from 3 or 4 people to 12 or 15 people, and different genders. And what they found after years of research is that the ideal group, the groups that were creating the most creativity, and they would test their creativity with different ways, was 8 people, 4 men and 4 women. Balance, a 50-50 balance between gender energy. So female energy, male energy, with 8 people were the most creative group. And the other principle of these groups was that everyone would agree that they would only do something if everyone agreed unanimously. And that is a big thing. It's hard to do, but it's not easy. But the things that I've seen come out of these groups is amazing. And I had the opportunity to actually put a group like this together in 2012. 2011 is when we actually put it together. And we called it Free America Now. And it took us longer to get to decisions, but everybody felt great when we got to the decision, because nobody was a minority that was getting coerced. Everyone had to agree. And so we all agreed to a mission statement, which took a couple of meetings. And then we agreed to help Sheriff Richard Mack create the first constitutional sheriff convention in the country. And within 90 days, he had been trying for years to put that together with different groups. And we did it. We did it within 90 days over Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday. We raised all the money for all the sheriffs to be able to travel there for their room and board. We paid for all the speakers. We raised the money from people that were vendors at the convention. Got the location, and we got 113 sheriffs there, which is 3% of the sheriffs in the country. Wow. And it was a fantastic event. And the feeling, the love that was there, the desire for freedom and the unity, it was amazing. It really was. So anyway, I kind of combined a lot of things there, but
I want to share with you that
yes.
Based upon the principles that you just described and shared with me a while back, a group of us in Santa Fe have adopted those principles. And our first full meeting was last week, and it was such a success.
Great.
There was a not just a tolerance, but there was a respect, and combined with the understanding that our differences are our strengths. And when we have the capacity to listen to someone else who is different and actually hear them, we have a takeaway from that enriches our life and our own knowledge about the reality before us.
Yeah.
And so I want to thank you for sharing now, and also in the forward in the book to Podolsky, because those the non-coerciveness is extremely critical.
Right.
When you consider that we are constantly being coerced.
Right.
And most people quite unconsciously coerce because it's become such a part of their their whole psyche.
That's all we know.
Yes.
We grow up with it. We've been we've imbibed it. We've digested it. We've been exposed to it. Our whole life is there's no, what's the alternative to government? Well, there isn't any alternative to government because governments are everywhere. Well, there is an alternative to government. It's non-coercive enabling organizations. We can do it. We can put it together. And in my, that one video that I told you about, I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, that I did in Libertopia in 2012, I explained all this. I explained D. Hock and what he did with Visa and using non-coercive enabling organization. I talked about Gore and Associates. That's another company that has no coercion at all. Nobody, 10,000 people in the company. No one tells anyone else what to do. It's a completely non-coercive enabling organization with 10,000 people, but it's all small groups of anywhere from 8 to 12 people. It's exactly what John David Garcia talked about. And that was because Bill Gore was an enlightened man. I met him in 1986. It was the most incredible thing. And he was just an enlightened man, and he figured all this out on his own. He had worked at DuPont, which was a very hierarchical, bureaucratic organization, and he couldn't stand it. And every once in a while, they would give him projects to do and let him give complete freedom. And he said, oh my God, this is amazing. This is night and day, the creativity that flowed in these groups. And so he started in 1958. He left DuPont, started Gore and Associates, and within 15, 20 years, he was a billionaire, one of the first in the world.
Let me ask you something.
Yes.
Having to do with economics. So many people would identify more with being a socialist than with a capitalist, because under capitalism, we have had total exploitation. Every empire has gone out, from the Pope onward, and come in and raped and pillaged and taken the treasures and left those there, you know, in pain and suffering and always.
Okay, can I stop you for just a second?
Please.
There's a big difference between capitalism and corporatism. I don't even like the word capitalism. I use free enterprise.
Okay.
Okay, so because free enterprise is people coming together naturally and trading with each other. And when people do that, when you have some sheep and I have some corn and you need some corn and I need some sheep, and we trade freely without interference from any governmental organization or anyone else, or any lord or, you know, somebody else trying to get a piece of the pie, we both come away richer. We've both improved.
Yes.
That improvement in your life and my life, that little bitty improvement that we engaged in, going on millions of times all over the world, that's what increases prosperity.
So what we're really,
that increase right there.
So
there's nothing better than that. And there's nothing that can increase prosperity for every person on the earth more than the ability for people to trade freely with each other, to engage in exchange together without interference. That's free enterprise, and that is the heart of capitalism. Now, capitalism, because of the centralization of power and corporations and governments working together to increase the power of corporations, have made many corporations carnivores. Okay, I mean they've acted in a horrible, horrible way, and because they acted that way, they were able to get away with it because they're in bed with the governments, and the people in the government benefit from those corporations, but through whether it's financial aid, you know, for elections or whatever. Then that gives the whole free enterprise and capitalism a very bad name. That's called corporatism. Corporatism is why I became a socialist when I was 20 years old. And I really liked Eugene V. Debs. And I had a non-direct relationship, but actually a relative of my wife's, was a worldwide socialist who was friends with Eugene V. Debs and all of those of his cohorts. And he was a great guy. I mean, he was a true socialist in terms of trying to better the working man. And I'm all for that. I want to better the working man. I've been a working man. I've been in labor construction union. I've worked on the railroad. I've worked that way. I know what it's like to be working for a big corporation at a very low level. And we need reform that way. And that would be part of any plan to go back to a non-coercive enabling organization. It's not going to work unless you figure out a way to control corporations and keep them from becoming carnivores.
Well, we saw that truly happening under President Reagan with the tremendous growth of the size of corporations, one gobbling up another until they became gigantic.
Well, and also look what
80s.
they did with the pharmaceutical companies.
Yes.
The Reagan administration allowed them to not have any financial liability for vaccines.
Yeah.
No harm. They could not be liable. Well, that just doesn't work. That doesn't make sense. I mean, a crime, when a crime is committed, when you've harmed somebody, you can't have a society that works where an individual or a corporation or any entity can do harm and not be liable for the harm that they cause.
Well, it's called ethics, and when we depart from ethics, then all hell breaks loose. So we have just about 10 minutes more.
Okay.
I wanted to talk a little bit about today. So here we are at a time of tremendous implosion, economic implosion, freedom having to do with freedom of speech, freedom to gather, freedom to express ourselves in any kind of way. The whole one world order appears to be growing exponentially, and to shut down the world, essentially, to implode the world simultaneously. Like, it was even faster than dominoes. It was more like the 9/11 buildings imploding.
Right.
So here we have people who are split. We have one side warring against the other. Mm-hmm. We have one side in fear. We could take a look at that and say an alignment with the mainstream, the pharmaceutical industry, the allopathic medical model. And then we have those who see through this and are looking at the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, holistic medicine, the freedom to be able to express.
Right.
So there's a huge schism in our country, in our world. And what I'm wanting to know from you, based upon these various principles, how can we imagine?
Hold on just a second. Sorry.
How can we imagine a world that supports a world of choice, a world of freedom that does not have this basic schism right down the heart of it?
Yeah. Well, I think what we have to do is we have to do the best we can to educate people about what it's really about. And power is addictive. Political power is addictive. And what happens is that these governors who crave, they become governors that, let me put it this way, power over others is like heroin, maybe even more addictive. And once somebody is experienced having power over others, they just need more of it. They need more of that drug. They just want more power. So what this has been, this whole shutdown, lockdown opportunity, has been an opportunity for these governors, these mayors, these bureaucrats, to increase their power, to exercise their power. And they can't stop themselves. And they're addicts. And that's what coercive institutions lead to. Always. And it always will. We'll never end this until we become enlightened enough to realize that we have to eliminate coercive institutions. We have to eliminate coercive institutions, hierarchies, and bureaucracies. And all of those things could be eliminated. The models are there. D. Hock did it with Visa. In his book, Birth of the Chaotic Age, he explains how he does it, how he did it with Visa. Bill Gore did it with Gore and Associates. And Ricardo Semler did it with his company, Semco, in Brazil, which he took over from his father and followed the Gore example. And he wrote a book called Maverick and another book called The 7-Day Weekend, which are very good for people to read. Those are models that show you that you can have a large organizational structure without coercion. The people, it's bottom up. People at the bottom of the structure are, actually there is no bottom in these structures, really. And in Gore and Associate, when I met Bill Gore, he handed me his card, and he was already a billionaire and started and founded this company. And the only title he had on his card was associate. When I gave him my card, it said founder, chairman of the board, CEO. I had all that on there. I didn't understand these concepts then. And he flattened the organizational structure. There was no hierarchy. There was no coercion. To this day, even though he's long gone, the company still follows those principles.
Well, Clyde,
so it can be done.
But what do you say? What do you say to people who are afraid, who are wanting, who have essentially put the elected officials as gods?
The first thing you have to understand is that they're using fear to control you.
Yes.
And there's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of here. This disease only kills people that are immune deficient, very immune deficient, very weak. It doesn't kill anyone else.
Well, we understand that. But what I'm saying is, I know they are using fear to control the people.
Right.
But are you saying that the people who are afraid are using fear to control the others? Because
no, I think people who are afraid are they're just allowing themselves to be subject to that fear and operating accordingly, when they need to be enlightened by people like that understand these principles, that they shouldn't be afraid, that their individual liberty and their individual need to make their own choices in their life, to be a human being, to be a fully developed human being, are more important than anything these governors are telling them.
But 80%, 80-20 principle rules here. 80% of the people are in this fear state. That's how people are able to be controlled, through fear. We know that, we've seen that historically. So how do
I don't know any other answer other than, Kathleen, other than education. And that's why, you see so many emails from me, and, I've written my books, and I do everything I can to educate people. I start with my family, and I've only been partially successful there. I'm actually more successful outside of my family, but that's just the way it is. I'm their dad, or grandpa. Anyway, no, I do pretty well with my family, but it's just about educating everybody you come in contact with. And I ride up and down A1A here in Florida on my bike, and I meet people all the time. And I end up talking about these things. I talk to these things about everybody I can. Some people don't want to hear it. Some people are just love what I have to say. And now they're friends, and we go out to dinner, and, so if you can convert one person a week to understanding these principles, just have them read my book, Common Sense Revisited. It's 48 pages long. It takes an hour and a half to read it. And that would put them on a track. And then I have a list of resources in the back of my book to continue in that vein to really understand. But there's so much out there that if people would just read The Law by Bastiat, which you can go online right now, Google The Law by Bastiat. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. Bastiat. Just that one little book. I think it's 30 pages long. It's mind-blowing how much intelligence and consciousness and awareness is in that little 30-page book. And read the original Common Sense by Thomas Paine, the first half of it. And that would be another 20 or 25-page read. I have things like that in my Common Sense Revisited in the back of the book. Actually, short things that you can go online and read, are life-changing. Life-changing. All of a sudden you understand what indigenous power is, and that you have that, and that's powerful. Yeah. And you start getting a group like this. I'm so glad. How many people did you have in your group the other night?
Well, we had, I think we had 21 people. We formed 3 groups.
Oh, good.
And we were following the idea of the small groups. I know Greg Bose is referring to those concepts, and his name was brought up about forming groups, and I was happy to say that I think I met the originals, originators, but so we're making great progress, and I want to thank you for this. I'll be sharing this interview with them.
It's the key. It's very simple, and you can start with 2 people. And that's what we did when we put Free America together. It was me and Mary Heiler. And then we said, okay, let's invite Michael Badnarik, who is also a Libertarian presidential candidate. And then we brought in a few others, and we tried for gender balance as well. I will tell you this: when we put these groups together, for some reason, we have a hard time finding enough women.
Wow. Well, that's interesting. We have a good proportion of women.
Good balance. Good for you.
I think we probably need more men, but I think we're pretty good balance.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Just keep it going, and then have those groups break off and form other groups. That's how it grows. And before you know it, you'll have a major influence on Santa Fe. That's really great.
I want to thank you very much.
Yeah, that's awesome. Get in touch with Kevin Innes too. He'll help you out with that. The one from Canada that I put you in touch with.
Yes.
He's really good. He's an expert on how to run those groups efficiently.
Very good.
So yeah, good.
All right.
Anything else?
I think that's it.
Okay.